Thank you guys so much for coming out for another live viewing of Fresh Off the Boat. Thank you very much to Time Inc. and A3 and Viacom and its Asian American Employee Network for making this possible. What we want to do, just like we've done for our prior couple of weeks, is have a little bit of a talk back with some people who can kind of shed some light on both their own personal reactions to this episode and to the show overall. And of course, we want to get your feedback as well. So we're going to bring out our panelists, our talkback panelists right up here. We've got Chung, the editor of Gothamist, Jen Kwok, stand-up comedian and author, and Rahman, who is a staff writer for Entertainment Weekly, and who actually has been doing the recaps for Fresh Off the Boat on a weekly basis. And there's me, of course, as well. So we're going to begin literally just by asking you guys what your hot take is on the episode. And this is the first time I saw it myself. There are moments that certainly made me cringe, and others that made me laugh very hard. And let's start with Ray. Actually, you saw it before any of us because you've been recapping this.
I did actually. I got an advance copy, but it was delightful the second time around as well. I like the episode. I mean, I thought it was really funny. Certain things really hit at home. I mean, you know, having a kind of an overprotective mother suspicious of sleepovers or, you know, any sort of potential untoward activity, was something, you know, that it was handled really well, and I thought I could relate to it.
How about Jen Kwok?
I've definitely felt the struggle of this episode, the not being able to do sleepovers and then feeling like you have to, I don't know, like be as cool or as in the know as the other kids, and the talk from the dad was just so awkward. I don't know about you guys, but I did not get any sort of talk at all.
I still haven't gotten the talk.
Yeah, you know the pain. Yeah. So I thought it was really interesting that they were able to show, because I guess you would think that normally an Asian parent wouldn't tackle it like that, but I love that the dad just went for it.
And like Jen,
like other Jen, right?
Like other Jen, you know, talk about wanting to assimilate. You know, you picking the most popular name. There were like 5 other Jens in my fourth grade class alone, to have 20 kids. So sleepovers were so foreign to me, and I had no idea what they were, and that part of me like really just aches for all the kids of immigrants, you know, who have no idea about American culture, and you know, they want to be part of all of that. And yeah, absolutely no sex talk at all, thank God. I got that from the movies, you know, like bodice ripper books at the bookstore that I would like read and stuff like that. So
I don't think I even learned what a bodice was, much less how to rip one. But seriously, I mean, you're a parent yourself right now, as obviously I am. And you know, it's challenging sometimes. Your daughter's much younger.
Right, she's 5, but I'm actually trying to be extremely real with her, because I feel like my parents were, you know, I think they were just struggling to succeed and wanting a better life for their child, and you know, because of all of their hard work, I feel very confident and comfortable in what I do, and I am like maybe honest to the point of scaring her with something, so much like Lewis is, you know, so.
Well, yeah, I admit that I haven't yet broached a lot of topics with Hudson or Skylar. My younger son is also in the audience, and I'm not sure that I have actually the grounding. I mean, like you, you know, my parents were hardworking immigrants who basically, you know, their form of education around this sort of topic was basically to turn a blind eye when I went and looked for it elsewhere.
And my parents were working so much that, you know, they weren't necessarily there to, you know, guide you through these things. It was very much, my dad was overseas a lot working, and my mom would come home at like 9 o'clock at night. So, yeah.
Well, so, now, Ray, you're doing the recaps for EW. Was that something you actually volunteered for, or, you know, were they specifically looking for somebody who might have, you know, some kind of insight into the show in doing so?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a mix of things. We had gotten screeners for the pilot probably about 6-8 months ago, actually. So it's a thing we've been talking about in TV meetings, and it was a thing I had aggressively kind of promoted within the TV meetings and staff meetings. I was just like, this is a really funny show. This show, I mean, you know, it's worth our attention, and you know, there's so many great parts of it. I mean, obviously Hudson's one of them. Constance Wu, I feel, is like a breakout from the show.
Yeah.
She's real strong, and Randall Park's amazing. So it's something that I'd been vocal about, you know, within the staff, and so I think when it came around time to sign, you know, who would recap it, I think that was one reason, and also because I think it probably would have. I think it was to help make sure that whoever writes the recaps can have some sort of, at least a grain of insight into the show. Obviously, it's supposed to be Eddie Wong's very personal tale based on his book, but the show, I feel like anyone can relate to it. In fact, I was just there was a review that Dan Feinberg wrote. He's a great TV critic, and he started off his review by like almost apologizing to Eddie by saying, I want to say that I relate to this show because he was a Canadian immigrant of Jewish background who grew up in Alabama. And so there's a lot of aspects of the show that he related to as well. And there's a lot of aspects I relate to as someone who isn't Taiwanese or East Asian. So I think it was important to get someone who kind of has an outsider's perspective to recap the show.
That's one of the things which I think is really interesting here, because the show is about someone with an outsider's perspective, an entire family who is now. But they are also at the center of the show. And to put an outsider's perspective in this fashion, a story that, and a POV that is rarely seen in any medium, only really twice ever in primetime network television, to actually all of a sudden have that be centered in our pop cultural universes is staggering. I mean, it's certainly one of the things I think that people reflect on every time they write about it, or every time they tweet about it or respond to it. It's like, this is so relatable, I can't believe this never happened before. Something like that.
Yeah, one of the great things about the show is that, and you know, many critics have pointed it out, but it makes the white norm culture feel like the outsider culture. It makes that feel weird and not the family at the center. I mean, there's been great episodes before where Jessica, the mother, is describing her take on Melrose Place, which is the hottest show in 1995, and she's like, so it's about a bunch of prostitutes who hate each other? Like, that's her understanding of the show, because, you know, it's just so bizarre, and it's just deservedly so. It's insane. So one of the things which I think this episode especially does is it takes the action into the school, obviously, and shows for the first time some of the threads that have been building up about this outsider, Eddie, trying to find his way in, right? And one of the nuances, and this is going to be tweeted about, I'm sure, is that there's a real interplay right now between the character of Walter, the African American kid. You've seen him now in every episode, right? And in each episode, it seems like there's an overture towards the two of them connecting, and then the white kids come in, and Hudson just drops him like a rock, or, you know, Hudson, I mean Eddie, drops him like a rock and moves on. And I just know people are going to be responding that, here we go again, you know, down this path. I mean, I can reassure you that the arc of those two characters is very important to this season. That this show, in many ways, is about Eddie's character doing two things. One is learning to accept that he is different, and in being different, being proud of that difference, being, you know, accepting of sort of the outsider status as something to make himself proud about instead of embarrassed by, and not perhaps to fight so much for that insider status with these kids. But in doing so, these kids end up kind of accepting him, and more importantly, there is again a reconciliation and more after that happens with the character of Walter. But given that, I mean, what do you guys think about that? Because I know that's one of the things people complain most about, you know, that this is about an Asian kid who likes hip hop, you know, historically and present day, very much an African American popular culture contribution, who uses black slang. There's a sort of question of cultural appropriation versus appreciation, and then there's this interplay with him and the African American kid. I mean, what's your feeling when you watch that, and in your own lives? I mean, how does it map out into things that you've encountered, you know, as you were growing up and now?
I mean, I think it's actually a pretty accurate portrayal of how race is kind of, you know, race relations are played out in school. I grew up in, not Orlando, but a very similar, like, super white, suburban neighborhood, and I think I never met a Chinese person that I was not related to until high school. So, like, throughout, like, adolescence and everything like that, it was like, okay, well, I'm definitely not like the white people who, you know, are in every Disney movie and, you know, seen all over TV. But then also, there was this otherness that was hard to connect with, you know, a black kid or a Latino kid with. But I think that it's really honest in his portrayal of loving hip hop genuinely. It's just, I guess, now that there's this actual person in his world who may not conform to those stereotypes or his idea of what black people are like from music videos, that it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
You do wonder about his 40-year-old best friend. That actually doesn't,
Oh,
that doesn't resolve in this season, but we'll see.
But I think, you know, kids, when you're a child, you want the easy way out. You know, you can't sort of process, you know, wanting to befriend someone who might be less popular or as unpopular as you are. Like, you're always trying to, it's like the survival of the fittest, right? You want to fit in, you want to be with everyone else, you don't have to worry. It's like in Mean Girls, why Lindsay Lohan's character gets sort of absorbed into the pack. What happened to me when I was younger, like, I grew up in my small town in New Jersey. It was extremely white, and in 4th grade, this Korean American girl from Queens moved to our town, and she dressed very different. Her parents were like very much more like immigrant parents, and I thought we should befriend her. And when I became friends with her, I was dropped by everyone else for some unknown reason, and maybe because she smelled a little bit more like Korean cooking, or she had different food, or, you know, and so then it was just the two of us, and it was like kind of a scarring experience to like suddenly not have the friends you had, you know, growing up from grades 1 through 4, but she's now still my friend after all these years, and it just makes you think, like, later on when you're able to process it, like, you know, it makes you stronger, and, you know, these people were just so caught up in themselves and they couldn't sort of see beyond. So it's also made me, I think, also made me more empathetic to other people. But yeah, I mean, I think kids especially, it's easier to sort of like drop people and take the easy way out.
It is easy to forget that these are 11-year-old kids on screen, right? I mean, that's do you remember what it was like being 11? An 11-year-old boy in particular, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was about 11, almost the exact same year that the show was set. And I definitely remember, like, I grew up in Boston, but we had moved to Michigan around when I was this age, to a new middle school. I mean, 99.9% white, and, there's a lot of things that ring true about the show, and especially, the weird, when you're a person of one color, but there's another person of color who's, a different background, and, it's not like a competition or anything, but it's all of a sudden you might replace that person or what they were, the position that they held before you showed up. Like, all of a sudden you are the exotic person, or you're the person who, people expect to be good at basketball or whatever, which was a thing that happened to me, which was the most random thing ever.
Really?
Yeah, it was really random. All these kids were like, "Oh man, can't wait till you join the team. You're gonna be really good at basketball, right?"
I almost associate with melanin or something.
I literally think people in Western Michigan thought the darker you were, the better you were at basketball.
It's like built-in Jordans.
It was to the point where, like built-in Jordans. It was to the point where I almost believed. I was like, maybe I'm good at basketball. I tried out. I was not good at basketball. I made the B team, but yeah, I mean, it's especially interesting watching this because Walter, the black kid, does not really try to assimilate at all. He has very different motives than Eddie. From the very beginning, Eddie, he's wearing his rap T-shirts and he's trying to fit in. Walter is, first of all, he's not trying to get the cool new sneakers. He's not, he's sitting at a different lunch table when Eddie shows up, and he likes it that way. He in fact doesn't even want to sit with Eddie. So
I don't like kids. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
which makes you wonder. I mean, because he's been in the school his whole life, presumably, whereas Eddie just moved here. So it makes you wonder what Walter's been through to make him so antisocial. Which
there's the spin-off right there.
Yeah.
But I mean, a little early to be talking about that, I suppose. 5 episodes into the the first show, but I think that's a really, really interesting insight, and I think that whole notion that as people of color, as minorities, especially if you grow up in an environment where everybody around you is very different from you and very similar to each other, then there's that sense if you end up hanging with other people who are different, you become differenter, right? That difference just sort of sticks to you and becomes more, like an anchor or something in your social life. and yet over time that also ends up being something that potentially can sustain you, right? Like you said, that is the girl who you end up staying friends with. Now, what's interesting though is that this is about a whole family that's in that situation. Obviously, you guys also grew up in, or certainly you did, Ray, right? Were there any other Asian Americans or Indian Americans in your neighborhood, or was
there was. I mean, there was like a community of sorts, but it was kind of dispersed around town. Yeah.
And was there any sort of like community center, as it were?
Yeah, there are definitely community centers, and that's one thing about this family is they don't have that here. They don't have that in Orlando, which is kind of striking. I'm not sure about everyone else on the panel, but I always felt like in the places that I grew up, there were always kind of magnets of activity where my family would find other people in their community. Was that like that for you guys?
I think that where I grew up, there weren't a lot of Asians in general, but whenever we got together to like celebrate the culture, it just felt like you may not necessarily get along with the other people if it weren't for the fact that we were all standing around like exploding firecrackers. So
that's what we do when we get together.
Yeah, so it felt like it was kind of like forced cultural interaction, for what I experienced.
Yeah.
Right. When my parents would get together with their also Chinese immigrant friends, it'd be like every month or so, and people would drive like an hour or 2 hours to like go and see each other, and we'd rotate. And I didn't necessarily like these other kids, and it just so happened that like all our dads went to the same high school together, and they also came to the United States too. And so, I think when my mom would discuss culture with like other adults in our town, it was when they did a book club of the Joy Luck Club, and that's when everyone could understand about a little bit more about the Chinese experience. So.
Yes, Joy Luck Club. This is the Joy Luck Club of our generation. Watch this. Now I understand you. But yeah, and I mean that is one of the things which really stands out about this show, that there isn't that additional nucleus of some sort.
Right.
They don't have a CLC or the equivalent thereof. They don't have a Chinatown, right? And those are things that are stated outright in the series. So they really are on their own, like not just fresh off the boat. They're on a raft, basically. And one of the things that does come off of that is when as Eddie kind of starts socializing, for instance, Emery's character, he can float and do anything, anywhere, right? But for Eddie, there's nowhere to reach out. There's actually an episode coming up in which he finally does encounter another Asian American kid and assumes that it's going to be, again, that natural fit. And let's just say it doesn't go that way. But one of the things that I thought was interesting here also about this episode, it's kind of a throwaway scene, is his second encounter with Nicole, right? Nicole's played by Luna Blaze. She's the next door neighbor's daughter, and attractive and older and all that stuff. But that's another arc that's happening there. And I'm kind of curious, because at age 11, I did not know anything about girls, and I was not interested in I don't want to get too personal. But all this is sort of happening in this prepubescent. Is this? I'm just kind of curious from your perspective. Is this when you guys started kind of awakening to boy-girl stuff in general, or?
It does seem a little early to me, but I always chalk that up to kind of the network or like the powers that be making sure that his story kind of has enough tension and mojo to it. I always feel like kids on TV are they're running into sexual encounters much sooner than kids in real life are.
At least Asian kids.
Yeah.
I felt like we actually did have the talk at our school in like 5th grade, and I remember the day that it happened, we all for some reason sat around in a circle, like me and a bunch of girls, and then everyone started going around and saying who they wanted to grow up and marry. So it was like we had the talk, and then we led to like marriage, like total like female narrative. But everyone would go around and say, "Oh, I want to marry whoever was cute at that time, like Devin Sawa or whatever New Kids on the Block." And I said I wanted to marry Jonathan Taylor Thomas, and it was just silence. And this one girl's like, "You can't marry him because he's white." And it was just like the two worlds colliding. It was like getting into the bridge of, you know, what's it like to have a romantic relationship combined with, but how does my race figure into this? Because there weren't any interracial relationships that were shown on television, the media in general. It was intense.
I like how it was totally plausible that you would marry him, except that he's white. Right?
Yeah.
That was the one impediment.
If I met him, it
So
would
was
be
there like
perfect.
a teacher in this?
This was
as far as-
lunchtime. It was unsupervised
okay.
lunch. Yeah.
So it was the other girls who said that, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean that was an intense thing. I mean, I know that I went to school with only 2 other Asians in our kind of cluster of grades, like up and down 2 grades. One of them was my sister. Actually, no, there were 3 others, right? One was my sister. One was my sister's friend in her grade. The other was me and my Asian friend in my grade. And he always had it tough because his given name was Allison. He's a boy, right? But his parents gave him the name Allison, and so he always got kind of mocked for his first name. And then, of course, he had an Asian last name. They always find ways to mock that as well. And we got to be friends not because of any particular affinity for being Asian, but because we both had the last names at the end of the alphabet, right? So in all alphabetical orders, we're always sort of thrown together. But I remember that when dating came up, the assumption, for whatever reason, was that I should be interested in my sister's friend, and Al should be interested in my sister, because like Noah's Ark, the Asians have to pair off in that way, right?
It makes you wonder on the show whether or not they're gonna, if Eddie pursues this romantic interest he has, if interracial dating will be a storyline or a thread.
We shall see. But yeah, it is interesting because it doesn't seem to actually be it's not something that's being talked about here. There's no sort of, if there's any sense, I mean, obviously Nicole is like rejecting him as a little kid, but it's because he's a little kid, right? It's, that aspect of race does not seem to figure right now. I guess we'll see. But okay, so we've gone through about enough time now, so I think it would be great to have some questions from you guys, and of course we'll keep talking. We have 2 microphones. I guess we'll pass around. If you want to ask questions, raise your hand, and Melinda will come over and grab you. Thank you. And introduce yourself first.
Hi, I'm Sophia Shu. I work for the city, actually. Do you need any more?
No, that's good.
Social Security number.
All right.
So, I was wondering, do they cover at all why the grandmother is in a wheelchair? Because I started reading the biography, so I know why.
Yeah.
But will they, in the rest of the season, ever cover why she's in a wheelchair?
It actually was a throwaway line in the last episode, Success Firm, where she talks about, my feet were bound when I was 7, right? And that is in fact true. That Eddie's, as you know from reading the book, Eddie's grandmother did have bound feet. But there are a lot of people who were angry about that line, thinking that she was joking. But no, the reason why she's in a wheelchair is in fact that. And I'm sure they'll go into it, they may go into it later on more, but right now the grandmother character is primarily, the character played for the kind of funny pop culture savvy laugh.
Yeah, and that actually, the pop culture savvy, the poker versus mahjong, just throwing that out there.
It happens earlier too, right? Because you see Constance's friends playing poker with her as well in an earlier scene in the series. I don't know. I wonder why they decided not to go with mahjong. In I think one earlier version of the script, not this episode, but that prior one, Constance was playing mahjong with her friends. It may be just because they thought it was too stereotypical, perhaps. Oh, by the way, so this episode, by the way, is written by Sanjay Shah. So it was written by one of the 4 Asian American writers on the show. There are 12 writers total, and 4 of them are, Asian American Papa, or as Eddie put it, full-blooded. I hate that term. But there are 2 episodes written by Sanjay. I think Sanjay is one of the funniest writers in creation, but in this show in particular. But what I thought was interesting was that he, admittedly said there are aspects of Chinese American or Chinese American culture that he didn't get, and yet nevertheless, when he wrote this, it felt like he was writing kind of his own, aspects of his own story. but yeah, so vis-a-vis the grandmother thing, we'll see. I mean, I know that she gets a bigger role in some of the later episodes. I'll say that.
Great.
I was just curious, are there going to be any episode written by a Chinese Asian American or Taiwanese American?
Yeah. Well, so there are no Taiwanese American writers on the show right now, but Ali Wong, who's actually in town right now, she's playing.
I think she's at NYU.
She's NYU
Yeah,
tonight,
yeah.
but she's doing the circuit, the stand-up circuit this week out here. I wish I could promote her a little more. I mean, Ali Wong is one of the staff writers. She's Chinese. She's Vietnamese Chinese American, and she does write an episode later in the season, which again is truly hilarious. It's called Very Superstitious, and it is about Asian superstitions. So yes, I guess the answer is yes, but it's also no, because there's not actually a Taiwanese American on the staff right now. I sort of feel like one of the things that is a larger conversation around this in terms of authenticity is who gets to play what, who gets to write what. Do you need to actually have somebody who is of a specific ethnicity in order for that to ring true? People have talked about Randall being Korean, for instance. People have talked about the fact that yes, the show has 4 Asian American staff writers, but none of them are actually Taiwanese American. And I think it's a conversation that should be had, if only because it forces us to think a little bit more about the meaning of cultural identity in this day and age. But I personally don't think that the episodes that were written by non-Asians are necessarily more culturally inauthentic than the other ones. There are a lot of people's eyes on it, and the room does speak as one, if you will. But still, a good question. The microphone's over here. Okay.
Hi, my name's Matt. I was wondering, well, if I were a kid and I explained to my parents that I wanted to go into acting, I'm pretty sure they would have told me to go into my room and don't think about it again. How much of a factor did, what was it like when Hudson presumably came over to you and said, I have this interest in acting and I'd like to express it?
Well, yes. No, I mean, I grew up in a similar situation, except that instead of wanting to be an actor, I went into journalism, which is even worse, So, my parents were very, they were very non-supportive until they realized that that I wanted to do that and that alone. And then they became quite supportive. That's kind of how Asian American parents tend to be. Like, they will push you to the edge, but if they can't move you, they're not going to let you fall, at least in my experience. That's not always the case. Because of that, though, for Hudson, when he came home and said he wanted to act, I said to him, look, if you want to do it, you understand it's really hard. Brush up your bartending skills. This is not a job that you roll out of bed and automatically you get the roles, right? But as it turns out, I have a friend who's sitting in the front row over here who actually knew somebody, a casting director, who knew of who was casting for a movie and was looking for an Asian American of that age. But yeah, Jennifer Hudson was in the movie. I mean, it actually played Sundance a couple years ago. It's called The Inevitable Defeat of Mr. and Pete. And Hudson tried out for that role. I brought him to this open audition. He went in. I sat outside waiting for him to come out, and I was just so sure this was going to be the fire that kind of burned out this budding desire to be an actor, that that this would kind of get rid of that phase. But he came out, and so the cast director was like, who represents him? Who's representing? I'm like, but we like him. We want to see him again. And so they brought him back for a callback, and then they brought him back for another callback, and then they decided that it was down to him and one other kid, and so they flew him to Los Angeles for a screen test. And this whole time I'm saying to him, this never happens, Hudson. This is not the way it works. So he ultimately didn't get the role, but because he was too young, had no experience, $40 million movie, the producers were like, look, we can't put this money on him, but he's great. We really think that if he had any experience at all, we would have cast him. They actually connected him with his current agents. And the next thing he went out for, that he auditioned for, he did get. So, yeah, if anybody out there is an actor, this is just terrible, I know. And I've told him that this is not going to be the way it is for the rest of his life. But he's gone out for 7, 8 auditions, and he's gotten 3 things. One of them is this, right? So he has this very mysteriously fantastical attitude towards this industry. But I guess you could say that, myself and his mom, have supported him, and it's paid off from that standpoint. But I would say that each of us here is, to a certain extent, an example of somebody who probably had a certain amount of parental skepticism in what we chose to do with our lives. And each of us has managed to not be homeless or whatever. Jen, when you said you wanted to be a stand-up comic, what did your parents say?
Well, I actually, I guess, had a semi-similar experience where I had a little bit of success early on, and so I was able to go up to my parents with the success and be like, look, see, people fly me to LA. This is not totally, illegitimate. But I think that they'll still always have that desire for security, and that comes from being an immigrant. That comes from just they were from the Vietnam War, so it's all about security. And my parents try, they waver. Sometimes I call, my mom's like, so are you gonna go back to school and maybe be a teacher? And then other times she'll call and be like, how was that audition? So it's there's still an adjustment period.
Jen, you actually had a great job and decided to launch this blogging thing on the side, right? And then you left that job.
Right, so I worked in advertising, and actually, when I was a kid, my dream job was to be a program executive at a network, because I love the idea of this person gets to watch this at this time, and we can do these different things. And I would have loved to be a film studies major. My mom's like, no, economics. So I studied economics, and I was kind of miserable, but then I took as many English and film classes as I could. And then I got a job in brand consulting and advertising, and but I was bored. And so my friend and I started a website. We were able to turn that into something, and it got to the point where I had to take a leap of faith. And my parents, I think, had sort of seen me in my various ups and downs, and they're like, okay, why don't you try it out? This is your only opportunity. And they were surprisingly supportive, but it took 12 years, 10 years to get to that point, really. And so now it's worked out. I was saying, the way I was playing it was, well, if I have a kid, I'll have more flexibility. I can work from home, and trying to really lay out the argument, because it's all about giving your parents face, and for them to say when they meet their friends what their child is doing, so they have their amount of pride.
Yeah, because that ultimately, that and being in the World Journal are the only 2 tests of whether or not you've succeeded. At least after you graduate from college. College is the other one, right?
Right.
How about you, Ray? Did you always want to be a journalist for that matter? Or?
I knew early on.
Yeah, that basketball thing to fall back.
Right. But once basketball didn't work out, I knew I had to fall back on something else. I always knew it'd be something related to something wordy, I guess, something liberal artsy. But for most of my childhood, my parents were encouraging me to, be a lawyer, be a doctor. Why aren't your science grades better? But once I realized, I literally can't do anything else besides, English was the only good grades that I ever got in school. So. Once they realized what I could do, they supported it. But now, there's a different kind of pressure where it's why aren't you at Time magazine? Why are you at Entertainment Weekly? And it's Dad, I'm in the same building as Time. Does that count? Close enough.
All right.
My name's Betty Kale. I actually am Taiwanese Chinese, when my parents are immigrants. So I don't know if you know this, but how did you find the writers for the show, and what's the writers' room like? And another question is, if they're so far away from everything in Orlando, where are they getting the Asian food from? Because that's such an identity.
Well, I don't personally have anything to do with the production of the show, other than, helping to produce that guy over there. But I do know that they actually cast a very wide net when they were looking for writers for this. They even asked me for suggestions. I did give them a couple of suggestions of Taiwanese and Chinese American writers who didn't end up getting booked for the show, didn't end up getting staff. But the thing is, I think that the showrunner of this, Nanatka Khan, who is Persian American and who was really gravitated to the show because she felt like some of the themes were very similar to ones she was an immigrant herself, not from Taiwan, but nevertheless, a lot of the same tropes exist if you come from another country, especially one that is seen as exotic and foreign in a particular way. Taiwan, nobody knows where Taiwan is. When I was growing up, they're like, "You're Thai?" No, Taiwan. And people know better now, but back then, I mean, you could say the same about Iran, right? Iran, Iraq, Persia. Where's Persia? I mean, she had a lot of the same sensibility around that, and I think the room that she put together, the writers she did pick, although there are no specifically Taiwanese Americans there, I think she went out of her way to find writers who could speak to that feeling of outsiderdom, and in particular, being alien in America at some point in their lives. And the second part was about food, and I mean, I think that no matter where you are, it's sort of weird. You could be like in North Dakota or something and be Asian American. Somehow there's like this, care packages get mailed to you or whatever. There's some way of getting ethnic ingredients somehow.
I feel like every town has like the Asian market, and I'm looking forward to the episode where they actually go to the Asian market, which was always such a fun experience, especially
It's true,
as
right?
a young kid.
Not the food for all. I mean, did you guys? You grew up in New York.
I grew up in New Jersey.
Oh, New Jersey.
And
Okay.
so my parents would actually come to Chinatown on Sundays, and they would double park in Chinatown, and they would leave me in the car as like the security and get the ticket. And I was so afraid because also the other thing is when they would park in like the worst places, and so we'd walk by the tombs all the time. So I was so afraid that while I was double parked, the police were going to take me and put me in the tomb. So yeah, my parents would make the weekly pilgrimage to Chinatown.
I honestly thought I was the only other 8-year-old that was left in the car to watch the car. I kept on wondering to myself, doesn't this actually make the crime worse, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're double parked and you abandon your child in the car.
Right.
But yeah, whatever. It's a head. That's all they care about. Somebody in there. Did you grew up somewhere
I
not?
grew up, north of LA. So it's probably like a 2-hour drive with traffic. So my parents we would drive for 2 hours and just load up the car. We had a special cooler for fish and the meat.
Did you have an extra fridge?
And
Yeah, the downstairs fridge where all
exactly.
the smelly meats
Yeah.
and fish and stuff.
Yeah.
The extra.
The extra fridge,
Yeah.
or extra freezer, really, with all the stale meat also.
The
that
carcass
you would,
fridge.
Yeah. It's horrifying as a kid.
But you guys made the pilgrimage and you stocked up and then
Yeah,
came back.
it was weeks at a time. You go in and it's $500 worth of groceries back in that day.
This was before Costco was a big thing, right? So,
Yeah.
and did you also, were you in the New York area? Or were you?
Yeah, well, so in Boston and in Michigan.
Oh, Boston, right, yeah.
But they would always, in Boston it was easier. In Western Michigan, we lived on the west side, but you would do a drive to Detroit or Chicago, whichever big city had the Asian market, and they'd stock up on saris and Bollywood videos, and go
Well,
back.
getting the videos, that was another big thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The underground, passing it amongst your
And
friends.
snacks, just all just the things that remind them of home. They would load up and same way
Restock the
load up the car.
squiddies.
Yeah, no squiddies for me.
All right. I guess we can take. What time is it now? It's 2 more. Okay.
Hi. Hi,
Oh.
so my name's Anna. I noticed when watching the first episode that when Eddie was introducing Randall and then Constance Wu, after that he kind of breezed over his little brothers. So I kind of did some research online and was trying to figure out whether he actually had 2 younger brothers or if they were thrown in because it was to kind of make it more relatable and create that, perfect 2.5 child family unit. Because I think Emery and Evan have kind of 2 of the most interesting one-liners in the show, and I really like seeing more of them. So I was kind of wondering why they were so quickly breezed over.
I think that was more of a joke than anything. But he has real brothers named Emery and Evan, Evan in fact actually lives here in New York, and helps manage Bauhaus, which is Eddie's restaurant. Now that Eddie's based in LA, it's hilarious because you can't imagine anybody less like the Evan on TV here than the real life Evan. So there is definitely some misogyny of the character, but they're real people, and And you'll see more Evan and more Emery come out over the course of the episodes. I think already Evan is kind of one of the breakouts too. There's so many people who just think he's hilarious, and he is. I'm talking about Evan on screen there. But yeah, it's that was just a throwaway joke, I think.
Hi, my name is Sean Gray. I think it's time is due for a show like this because you know I like knowing about Asian families. I was married to an Asian, divorced now, but also related to the guy that I was a good basketball player too. I was in Connecticut, and my son was embarrassed that I couldn't play basketball, and I'm black. I really like what's going on as the show. Hopefully it is true to point, and maybe I'll get to watch it. My sister's dictator TV, so I don't choose what I want to watch, but hopefully I get to watch more of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Candace, and just to add to what he just said about watching it more, I know this is, it's early in the season, but has there been any talk about continuing the show?
It's interesting because we were talking about this in the green room actually. It's such a painful process, the world of television these days especially. They're so quick to yank shows that are not doing well, but shows that are doing well, they really push it to be as far back as possible before they announce a renewal. And there's this thing called the upfronts that take place, basically May, right? First weekend of May, and that's where they announce the schedule for the next fall season. And all the pilots that are being made and being produced and cast and all that stuff right now, they're shown. Everybody sits on the edge of their seats to see which gets picked up. A lot of the cancellations or renewals are based on whether they have something else to put in those slots. So they rarely make early renewals unless the show's ratings are exceptional. Unless there's absolutely no question that show is going to come back. Modern Family, its first season, was just off the charts, and everybody knew it was going to come back. We're still a little bit on the edge. I mean, the show's done better than expected, but not so well that it's a guaranteed win. And the reality is this: people think it's really funny. The people who love the show really love the show. It is a show that's controversial. It's a show that had some tough times out of the gate. A lot of kind of weird controversies popping up. Sombreros and chopsticks, and Eddie Huang kind of doing his thing. And at the end of the day, there's some uphill that has to be done there. But the critical response has been great. Social media has been very supportive. The ratings have been solid. It's just a matter of keeping that going. So tell people to watch it. I mean, do you have any other insight to add?
I mean, I do feel like sometimes, usually a show like this, which has really high critical praise and also pretty good ratings. I mean, you're selling yourself short. It's for a new network sitcom. The ratings are pretty good. It would be, I think, unusual for them to cancel it, but I have no say in it.
From your mouth to Paul Lee's ears. No, but all right, I guess that's.
Well, okay, one more question.
Oh yeah, cool.
Then we have to.
Okay, my name's Tim, and on the same token of what you were just saying, I feel like in this internet generation where everybody is like an expert on everything and everyone has a blog, have you felt like the Asian American community has just overreacted to really a ridiculous joke, or what have people tripped about that you just feel like was just completely
Asians
ridiculous?
Overreacting?
I can't believe that. Well, actually, as somebody who does have a blog network, Jen, I mean, what's your sense about this? Just in general, the kind of wave culture, the sort of the mobbing of the internet that's occurred. When people love something, it goes viral. When people hate something, though, it goes insane.
I mean, in this particular instance, you would be able to speak to it better, but I haven't really seen. I mean, actually, my husband, who's not Asian at all, he asked me am I allowed to laugh at some of these jokes because he was so concerned. Because we have our own weird sitcom situation where my mom lives with us, my brother lives next door, and my husband
I love that.
Right. My husband's Midwestern and stoic and weird. So, no, I think if people really hate something, they'll let you know, and it can be over the stupidest thing, and you sort of don't see the forest for the trees. So I feel very badly for people who work really hard on a project and then it gets misinterpreted for the stupidest reasons. So, but you know, Ray and you may have a better insight into people, you know.
I will say that as far as the people who early on were critiquing the show, and even now, every so often you see stuff, it was the weirdest thing because I think the early vibe that people had, you know, most people who were critiquing the show were saying, oh my god, the name, Fresh Off the Boat, it's about an Asian immigrant family, it's going to be so super, you know, so super stereotypical, and it's going to be totally racist against Asians, and how can Asians stand for that? And again, it's mostly not Asians who are saying this, it's non-Asians who are trying to protect us from our own show. You know, the first in 20 years. Thank you so much, people. But that was the vibe, and they were I mean, I actually had this sort of running thing. I actually made this slide that said, Fresh Off the Boat is not racist towards Asians, and here's why. And I just would send the same thing to everybody who was like tweeting again and again, what a racist show, before it even came out. Once it actually came out, it kind of swung the other way, and it was mostly like white people, let's just put it that way, who were like, oh my god, this is so racist to white people. I'm like, first of all, you can't really be racist to white people. It's not the same thing exactly. You can be racially prejudiced or discriminate. I mean, you can mock white people, but the way that they generally have said it is all of the characters who are white seem to be buffoons or, you know, or like ignorant quasi-racists or something. And that's so unfair. And I'm like, okay, have you watched Asian portrayals in the last 20 years? Because this is nothing compared to that. And furthermore, if you took all those characters and put them in a show where it wasn't an Asian family at the center, no one would give a crap. Seinfeld was nothing but those characters, right? But it is different contextually when you have an Asian family at the center. People aren't used to Asians laughing at them, if you will. Even though Asians do it all the time anyway, like other languages.
Secretly.
Anyway, thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys for coming. Thank